Chapter 1: The Exhibition. The grand hall was filled with the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft shuffle of footsteps on polished marble floors. It was the opening night of the city's most anticipated art exhibition, showcasing the works of renowned artists from around the world. Among the crowd stood Emily Carter, a young and talented artist whose abstract paintings had garnered attention in the local art scene. Tonight was her debut on a much larger stage. Emily adjusted the strap of her dress, a deep navy blue that complemented her auburn hair, and took a deep breath. She had spent months preparing for this night, pouring her heart and soul into each brushstroke. Her paintings, vibrant and full of emotion, adorned the walls of the gallery, each piece telling a story of love, loss, and longing. As she moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with guests and answering questions about her work, Emily's eyes kept drifting to one painting in particular, a large canvas at the far end of the room. It was her most personal piece, one she had created during a tumultuous period in her life. The painting depicted a figure standing at the edge of a cliff, gazing out into a stormy sea. It was a reflection of her own feelings of isolation and uncertainty. Just as she was about to approach the painting, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Emily Carter, I presume." She turned to find a man standing beside her, his dark hair neatly combed and his suit impeccably tailored. He had an air of confidence about him, and his piercing blue eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Yes, that's me," Emily replied, offering a polite smile. "I'm David Sinclair," he said, extending his hand. "I'm an art critic for the Art Review. I've been following your work for some time now, and I must say I'm impressed." Emily shook his hand, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from someone with your reputation." David smiled, his gaze shifting to the painting at the far end of the room. "This piece," he said, nodding toward it, "is particularly striking. It has a rawness to it that I find compelling." Emily followed his gaze, her chest tightening as she looked at the painting. "It's personal," she admitted. "It represents a time in my life when I felt lost and uncertain." David studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Art has a way of capturing the essence of our emotions," he said softly. "You've done that beautifully." They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in the depths of the painting. Emily felt a connection to David, an unspoken understanding between them. She had always believed that art could bring people together, but tonight, it felt as though her own creation had drawn her into a new and unexpected relationship. As the evening wore on, Emily found herself seeking out David's company. They discussed art, life, and everything in between, their conversations flowing effortlessly. There was a spark between them, an undeniable chemistry that neither could ignore. By the end of the night, as the last guests were departing, David turned to Emily with a smile. "I'd like to see more of your work," he said. "Perhaps we could meet for coffee sometime." Emily hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that." As she watched him walk away, a mix of excitement and apprehension stirred within her. She had no idea where this connection would lead, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward David Sinclair. Little did she know, this chance encounter would set in motion a series of events that would challenge her beliefs, test her boundaries, and ultimately change the course of her life. Chapter 2: The Coffee That Turned Into a Lie. The cafe was tucked away between two aging bookstores in an older part of the city, one of those quiet, almost forgotten places that made you feel like time moved differently there. It had mismatched furniture, chipped ceramic mugs, and the comforting smell of espresso that lingered like an old song. It was the kind of place artists loved. And David had picked it perfectly. Emily arrived 10 minutes early. Not because she was nervous but because she was. She sat near the back, where the light filtered through a dusty window and turned everything gold. Her fingers drummed against the side of her coffee cup, which had a small crack near the handle. She kept glancing at the door, and every time it opened, her stomach twisted. David walked in exactly on time. Of course he did. He wore a black wool coat over a charcoal suit, no tie, but crisp in a way that made her feel like he belonged in a different century. He spotted her instantly and offered that same quiet, confident smile that had gotten under her skin the night they met. "Still drink your coffee black?" he asked as he approached. "With a little sugar," Emily said. "I'm complicated." He laughed, ordered his own, and joined her at the table. They picked up their conversation like old friends. Easy, curious, open. David talked about the pressures of his job, the loneliness of writing critiques that often made enemies out of strangers. Emily talked about the exhaustion of trying to survive as an artist, of pouring herself into work that people viewed for seconds before moving on. They were honest. Too honest. David listened the way people rarely did. Really listened. His attention never drifted. His eyes never wandered to his phone. When she spoke, it felt like she was heard, like she wasn't just another creative voice screaming into the void. She told herself that's why she liked him, that it was just appreciation, connection between kindred minds. And for a few weeks it was. They met for coffee once a week, always at the same cafe, always at the same table near the window. They talked about art but also about grief, family, regrets. David confessed that he had once dreamed of painting before choosing the path of criticism. Emily shared how her mother had never understood her desire to be an artist, calling it a glorified hobby. They never crossed a line. Not at first. But the emotional intimacy grew. So did the late-night text. The slow, addictive way David would message her after an opening or a review he'd written, asking what she thought, what she felt, what she really thought about the world and her place in it. One night, while lying in bed next to her husband, Emily read a text from David that simply said, "Sometimes I think you see the world in colors I've forgotten." She stared at it for a long time. She didn't respond. But she didn't delete it either. Her husband, Nathan, was kind, steady. The type of man who fixed leaky faucets and made spreadsheets for their vacations. They'd been together since college. 10 years of marriage, 2 moves, no children by choice. He believed in her art, supported it, framed her first gallery piece and hung it in their hallway, even though he never really got it. They were comfortable, and sometimes painfully too comfortable. Nathan kissed her goodbye every morning, asked how her day was, remembered her deadlines. But somewhere along the way the spark had dimmed. Their conversations were functional. Their intimacy routine. Their connection distant. She loved him. But love didn't feel like enough anymore. One afternoon, after meeting David for coffee, he walked her to her car in the parking garage. It was raining lightly, and she didn't have an umbrella. He held his coat over both their heads as they walked. At the driver's side door, she turned to thank him, and their faces were too close, too still. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But he looked at her like he wanted to. And she didn't step back. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept remembering the way his hand had lingered on her shoulder. The look in his eyes when she'd told him she felt invisible in her own home. She told herself she hadn't done anything wrong. But when Nathan rolled over and put his arm around her, she flinched. The next coffee meetup didn't feel the same. There was tension now. An electricity under every word. She wore lipstick that day. He noticed. He complimented it. "You always wear the color red like it's not afraid of anything." She looked away, smiled despite herself. When he touched her wrist briefly during a joke, the contact sent heat shooting through her chest. This was no longer harmless. She knew that. And she didn't stop it. The line was finally crossed 2 weeks later. She was at his apartment. They'd agreed to meet there to look at a portfolio of an up-and-coming painter David wanted her opinion on. She told herself it was professional. It wasn't. He made coffee. They looked at the pieces. Laugh. And then there was a pause. One of those quiet, loaded silences where both people know exactly what's about to happen. He stepped closer. And she let him. The kiss was soft, low, careful. Like he was giving her time to stop it. He didn't. In that moment it felt like coming up for air. Like she had been drowning for years and hadn't realized it until that first breath hit her chest like a revelation. She didn't think about Nathan. Not until it was over. Not until she was back in her car, gripping the steering wheel like it could keep her from unraveling. She didn't cry. She didn't feel guilt. Not yet. What she felt was more dangerous than guilt. She felt alive. Chapter 3. The version of me you'll never know. Emily became an expert in silence. Not the kind that filled the room when no one spoke, but the kind you built around yourself brick by brick. Each omission, each withheld truth, a new layer of insulation. It didn't start with outright lies. It started with a late lunch that turned into an early dinner. Coffee that lasted too long. A gallery meeting she didn't actually attend. Nathan never asked. Or if he did, it was so casually, so kindly that she could answer without flinching. How was your day? Busy. Good. It was all true in a way. Just not the whole truth. The first time she slept with David, she told herself it was a mistake. A moment of weakness. A lapse in judgment. But the second time was a choice. The third a pattern. And by the fourth, it was a secret she protected like a precious object, fragile and blinding in its danger. David was careful too. No public affection. No traceable messages. They communicated through an encrypted chat app he used with sources when writing controversial critiques. He was practiced, which should have scared her. Didn't. It made her feel like they were in on something together. A story only they understood. It wasn't just about sex. It was who she became when she was with him. With Nathan, she was Emily the responsible. The artist wife. The partner who meal prepped and signed mortgage renewal forms. She wore sweatpants and tied her hair back and remembered to call his mother. With David, she was Emily the enigma. The muse. The woman who wore red lipstick and whispered half-formed ideas in bed at 2 a.m. The woman who admitted to doubts, who talked about pain like it was a paint color, who cried once during an orgasm and didn't apologize for it. David never asked her to leave Nathan. That was part of what made it worse. He liked the forbidden edge. The thrill of knowing she was spoken for and still choosing him. You don't belong in that house, he told her once. You shrink there. Emily didn't disagree. But she didn't leave. Not yet. Her paintings changed. They became bolder, darker, more visceral. Her usual soft swirls and muted palettes gave way to sharp contrasts, slashes of red and obsidian, textures that rose violently from the canvas like wounds. People noticed. Her gallery owner called to say one of her newest pieces had sold to a collector for triple its listing price. You've tapped into something raw, she said. People feel this. Emily hung up and stared at the unfinished painting in her studio. Her fingers still stained with crimson oil. It was a self-portrait in a way. Not her face. But her guilt. Her hunger. Her duality. One Saturday morning, Nathan made breakfast. Pancakes, eggs, fresh coffee. He set the table with actual napkins and poured her juice before she even walked into the room. You're glowing lately, he said, smiling. Emily froze. What? You just seem lighter. Happier. She sat down, forced a smile. Thanks. Maybe I'm just hitting a stride with my work. I can tell, he said, cutting into a pancake. I don't know what's changed, but I like seeing you like this. Emily's stomach twisted. She couldn't look at him. Because the truth was, she didn't feel lighter. She felt split open. Like there were two of her now. One who lived in this kitchen, and one who existed in the shadows of another life. That night, when Nathan wrapped his arms around her in bed, she didn't pull away. But she didn't close her eyes either. She stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering which version of herself she would wake up as in the morning. David started asking harder questions. Do you love him? Emily hesitated. Yes. But not the way I used to. What does that mean? It means, I don't know if I love him or if I just love the life we built. The safety of it. David was quiet for a long time. Then he said, You're not safe anymore. You know that, right? She did. But she wasn't sure she wanted to be. Then one night it all came too close to the surface. They were in David's apartment. The rain outside pounded like a warning. She had been distant all evening, her head full of static, and he noticed. "What's going on?" he asked. "I dreamed Nathan found out." And he didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just walked away. And I woke up feeling like I'd lost the only version of myself that ever made sense. David moved to sit beside her. "You're not her anymore." She nodded. "That's what scares me." "Is it me that scares you?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's how much I don't want to stop." That night they didn't sleep. They didn't talk much either. It was as if the silence had finally turned into a third presence in the room. Thick, real, looming. The next morning, Nathan asked her to take a weekend trip with him. "Just us," he said. "It's been a long time." Emily blinked, the question hitting her like a slap. "You want to go away?" "Yeah, just a few days. Get out of the city. Hit reset." She stared at him and realized she didn't know how to say yes without lying. But she didn't know how to say no without breaking something open. So she said, "Let me check my calendar," and walked out of the room, heart pounding, a life unraveling, one coffee at a time. Chapter 4. The echo in the silence. Emily agreed to the trip. She didn't want to. Every part of her screamed to avoid it, to run back into the arms of the chaos she was quietly building with David. But she said yes to Nathan because she had to. Because not saying yes would have raised questions, forced conversations she wasn't ready to have. They drove upstate to a quiet town nestled near the Hudson, full of antique shops and leaf-strewn sidewalks. The Airbnb was quaint, an old farmhouse with creaky floors and crooked charm. Nathan had booked it himself, proud of the effort. "It even has a clawfoot tub," he said, smiling at her as he brought their bags in. She smiled back, but it felt like a reflex, like muscle memory. That night, they ate dinner at a candlelit Italian place where the pasta was homemade, and the waiter poured wine with dramatic flair. Nathan talked about work, about maybe switching departments, about finally buying that kayak he kept browsing online. Emily nodded, laughed at the right moments, even reached across the table to touch his hand when the mood felt right. But it wasn't real. Not anymore. And she could feel it, the difference. It was like wearing a mask of her old self. One that didn't quite fit anymore. The second night, they sat on the back porch of the farmhouse under a sky so clear it looked fake. Nathan handed her a blanket, poured them both whiskey, and sat close. "I've missed this," he said. "This. Talking. Sitting still. Not rushing through everything like we're trying to catch up to our lives." Emily nodded slowly. He looked at her for a long time and she felt it, that shift in his eyes. The soft, searching confusion of a man who suspects something but isn't ready to name it. "You've been different lately," he said. "More distracted. Like your mind's somewhere else." Her heart jumped, but her face didn't move. "I've just been in a weird headspace," she said softly. "With the work. With the pressure." "You've always had pressure," he said. "But this feels different." She looked away into the trees. He didn't push. And maybe that was worse. Because if he had asked directly, she might have cracked. Might have sobbed and confessed everything and begged for a forgiveness she hadn't earned. But instead he just sat there beside her, quiet, loving, safe. And that made the guilt so much harder to breathe through. Back in the city, David waited like a match held over gasoline. "You're distant," he texted the day after she returned. "I just needed space," she replied. "From me. From everything." She deleted the message and rewrote it 5 times before sending it. David didn't reply for hours. When he finally did, it was short. "Call me when you're ready to be honest." He didn't. Not that day. Not the next. Not because she didn't want him. But because she wasn't sure she could handle what wanting him meant anymore. She threw herself into work. Painted obsessively. Visited galleries. Attended a panel about women in abstract art and stayed behind just to lose herself in the crowd. She stopped replying to David's texts. Told herself it wasn't ending, it was pausing. That she just needed time to remember what her life had looked like before all this. But the truth was she couldn't go back. Not really. Even the way she looked at Nathan had changed. He wasn't dumb. He noticed. He noticed the way she stopped reaching for his hand at night. The way her smiles never reached her eyes. The way she came home later and later and offered fewer and fewer details. One night, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Nathan paused the screen and turned to her. "Are you in love with someone else?" The room went still. Emily's chest caved in. She looked at him. Really looked. And saw the man she'd built a life with. The man who had held her when her father died. Who had stayed up with her through panic attacks and celebrated every gallery opening with too much champagne. The man who loved her with a quiet steadiness she had once mistaken for boredom. She opened her mouth. But no words came out. Nathan didn't press. He nodded once slowly. "I thought maybe." And he stood up. Went to bed. Alone. That night Emily drove. Nowhere in particular. Just through the city, past the galleries and restaurants, through neighborhoods that felt like memories. She didn't call David. Didn't go to his place. Instead, she ended up at the studio. She stood in front of her latest painting for a long time. It was monstrous, huge, angry, smeared with blood reds and charcoal grays. It looked like it had been painted by someone possessed. Someone in mourning. She picked up a brush and dipped it into a soft blue. She made a single stroke down the center. Then another. And more. Until the rage was softened by something calmer. Something that looked almost like surrender. She didn't know what the painting meant. She only knew it was the first one she had finished in weeks. And that somewhere in its color was the version of her that was still trying to figure out how to live with what she'd done. The next morning, David showed up at the studio. Unannounced. He knocked once, then let himself in. She looked up from her workbench, startled. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. "I figured you wouldn't answer if I warned you." He looked around the studio. Saw the painting. The streaks of blue. "You're different," he said. "I have to be." He nodded. Then, after a moment, said, "Do you still want this? Us?" Emily looked at him. She remembered the thrill. Pull. The lies. And she didn't answer right away. Because what she wanted wasn't simple anymore. It never had been. And the cost of wanting had finally started to feel like a noose around her neck. Chapter 5. What the canvas couldn't hide. Emily didn't answer David's question that day. Not with words. Instead, she handed him her silence, the way a child hands over a broken toy, hoping someone else might know how to fix it. He didn't press her for a decision, but the look in his eyes, half longing, half exhaustion, said he was already beginning to mourn her. After he left the studio, she sat alone in the thick silence and stared at her newest painting. Blue streaks on chaos. The only truth she'd been able to tell lately. Later that night, Nathan didn't come home for dinner. She texted once. "All okay." He replied an hour later. "With friends. Don't wait up." No kiss emoji. No heart. Just a sentence. Just a shift. Emily poured herself a glass of wine and ate alone. The quiet in the apartment so loud it made her bones ache. She missed the noise. Missed the hum of an unspoken routine. Of drawers opening, water running, two forks clinking in a sink. She didn't miss it like someone misses a lover. She missed it like someone misses a floor beneath their feet. 'Cause now she was suspended. Floating. Waiting for the ground to either catch her or crack open completely. The next few days moved like slow, wet cement. David didn't reach out again. Nathan stayed cordial but distant, moving through their shared space like a roommate rather than a partner. They shared meals, talked logistics, never touched. And then came Claire. Claire was Emily's closest friend. Not in a soft wine night way, but in a saw you through every phase of your life way. They'd gone to college together. Claire had been the first to read Emily's early poems. The one who dragged her out of depressive spirals in her 20s. She knew her rhythms. Knew her lies. So when they met for lunch that Friday and Emily kept glancing at the door, Claire said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Then quietly, "Who is he?" Emily looked up, her fork mid-air. What? Claire didn't smile. I've seen you in love. I've seen you broken. This isn't either. This is elsewhere. Emily's throat tightened. I'm not judging, Claire said. I'm just worried. You've gone quiet. Your eyes look like they're always somewhere else. And Nathan texted me last night. Emily blinked. What? He didn't say much. Just asked if we'd been spending time. If I knew what was going on with you. Said you've changed. Said he's trying not to be paranoid. Emily set her fork down. Her chest felt like it had caved in. Claire reached across the table and took her hand. Talk to me, Em. The words came out in a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. Claire's face didn't move, but her grip tightened. It started small. Just coffee. Just someone who saw me. Who listened. Who made me feel like I was still me. Not just this quiet version of a wife I didn't recognize anymore. Claire exhaled slowly. Is it over? Emily looked away. I don't know. That night, Nathan was already asleep when she came home. Or pretending to be. His back was to her. His breathing even. She didn't try to wake him. Didn't crawl in next to him. Instead, she went to the living room and curled up on the couch with a blanket and stared at the ceiling until morning light seeped through the windows. At 6:30 a.m., Nathan walked into the room. His eyes were tired. Not angry. Just hollow. You're not happy, are you? She didn't answer right away. I don't know what I am anymore, she finally said. Are you in love with him? Tears welled instantly. I don't know. I think you do. She swallowed. I didn't plan it. Nathan sat in the armchair across from her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, he said, I always knew you were meant for more than me. That's the irony. I think I've always been afraid I couldn't keep up with the way your mind moves. The way you feel things. She sobbed once, quietly. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, he said. Then more quietly. But you did. She didn't see David again until the next week. He was waiting outside her studio one morning, leaning against the brick wall like he belonged there, like this whole thing hadn't already begun to collapse in on itself. I shouldn't be here, he said. But I had to see you. She didn't say anything. He stepped closer. You're drifting, Emily. Feel it. And I don't know if it's because you're trying to go back or because you're afraid of letting go. Her eyes filled. I can't live like this. Then don't. It's not that easy. It is. It's just hard. She looked at him. Looked at the man who had cracked open her ribcage and whispered life into parts of her that had gone quiet for years. And she realized. She didn't know how to choose. Because both choices would cost her something she wasn't ready to lose. Later that week, Nathan packed a bag. I need space, he said. I don't know if we're fixable, but I can't figure that out in the same room where I stopped recognizing you. Emily nodded, eyes full. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible. I believe you, he replied. Then he left. No door slam. No dramatic pause. Just absence. In the days that followed, Emily barely painted. She wandered her studio like a ghost, touched canvases but never lifted a brush. The city felt louder. Her own apartment felt empty. David texted her once. I'm here whenever you're ready. She didn't respond. She didn't know what she was ready for. All she knew was that the life she'd been living was gone. And she was standing at the edge of whatever came next. Alone, afraid, and for the first time, fully accountable. Chapter 6. The weight of what remains. Emily didn't open the curtains for 3 days. The apartment was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of her phone vibrating against the kitchen counter. Most of the time it was David. Few times Claire. Once, her gallery owner, wondering if she was still planning on showing her new pieces for the upcoming spring exhibit. She ignored them all. Silence became her new language. Every room felt different now. The couch where she and Nathan used to curl up on lazy Sunday mornings was now a memory stitched with grief. The kitchen counter where she once drank coffee and laughed at his bad puns felt haunted. Even her pillow, still holding the faint scent of his shampoo, had become an indictment. This was what guilt looked like. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, persistent, knowing. On the fourth day, Claire showed up. She didn't knock. She had a spare key from when Emily had broken her wrist 3 years earlier and never asked for it back. She let herself in, dropped a bag of groceries on the counter, and found Emily on the floor of her studio, staring at a half-finished canvas like it might betray her. "You look like a woman who hasn't eaten in 2 days," Claire said. Emily didn't respond. Claire knelt down beside her. "You don't have to say anything. I'm not here to play therapist or deliver a speech. I'm just here." Emily nodded, tears gathering fast. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. Claire placed a hand gently on her back. "You're the same person who painted grief into light. Who once told me that art is how we survive the things we can't say out loud." Emily's shoulders shook. "I destroyed him, Claire." "No," she said softly. "You hurt him. You made a mess. But destruction implies you wanted to ruin something. And you didn't." Emily looked at her. "I don't know if he'll ever come back." "Then maybe this is your reckoning," Claire said. "And maybe reckoning isn't the same as punishment. Maybe it's just the part where you decide what kind of woman you want to be now." That night, Emily painted. For the first time in weeks, she didn't think. She didn't plan. She just moved. Layer after layer. Color over color. The canvas turned into a storm of gray and gold, of ash and amethyst. She painted until her hands ached, until her arms trembled, until the floor beneath her was speckled with drops of color and sweat and maybe even tears. When she finished, she stood back and stared. It was the most honest thing she'd created since the affair began. Not beautiful, not perfect, but real. The next morning, she texted her gallery manager. "I'll be ready. I have pieces I want to show. Ones that matter." She didn't wait for a reply. She just went to the sink, washed the paint off her hands, and made herself a proper breakfast. Small acts of control. One breath at a time. David showed up again 2 days later. He didn't knock right away. Just stood outside her building, texting. "Please. Just 5 minutes. No expectations. I just want to see you." She opened the door. He looked tired. Less polished. His stubble had grown in. His shirt was wrinkled. He looked like a man who had been waiting too long for an answer he wasn't sure he wanted anymore. "You look different," he said, stepping inside. "I am." They sat at opposite ends of the couch. "I'm not here to beg," he said. "I just needed to know what this was for you. What we were." Emily nodded slowly. "You made me feel alive. Like I was more than just a role I'd been playing. And I loved that. I don't know if I loved you or just the way you reflected me back to myself." He exhaled, the words cutting deep, but not unkindly. "I cared about you," he said. "Still do. I know. And Nathan." She looked away. "I think he's gone. Maybe not forever. But for now." David stood. "I hope you figure it out," he said. "I'm trying." He smiled, tired, sad, but genuine. "Then maybe we were just the spark. Not the fire." He didn't kiss her goodbye. He just left. Emily didn't chase him. Didn't cry. Just walked to her studio, picked up her brush, and began again. Not to forget. Not to erase. But to own. Chapter 7. A life measured in silences. 3 weeks passed. Emily didn't count them in days. She counted them in silences. Mornings where Nathan didn't call, nights where the phone didn't buzz with David's name, entire afternoons where she moved from one room to another without speaking a single word to anyone. The city didn't pause for her grief. The mail still came. Buses still groaned down the block. Couples still argued on the sidewalk. But inside her apartment, everything felt like ash. Her show was 2 weeks away. She had 7 finished pieces. Each one angrier than the last. She hadn't painted beauty. She'd painted rot, regret, longing, but also, strangely, liberation. And every time she stared at the finished canvases, she felt the sting of truth rising in her chest. This was who she had become. Not the woman who cheated, but the woman who changed, who burned her own house down to see if she could survive the smoke. Then came the email. From Nathan. Short. Measured. Subject. Apartment. I'll be back next week to pick up some of my things. Just a few essentials. I won't stay long. Hope that's okay. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for several minutes before she replied. Course. Let me know when you'll be here. She didn't ask how he was. Didn't beg. Didn't say she missed him. Because at this point words were bullets, and she'd already fired too many. Claire stayed close. Came over twice a week. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat on the balcony in silence, watching the lights of Manhattan flicker like stars that had lost their way. One night, Claire asked the question Emily had been avoiding. Do you regret it? Emily swallowed. Which part? The affair. Emily exhaled. I regret what it did to him. What it did to me. But I don't regret seeing myself. For the first time in years I saw myself clearly. And I didn't like everything I saw, but at least I saw it. Claire nodded, then softly. Do you think there's any version of this where you and Nathan find your way back? Emily looked down at her wine. I don't know if he could ever love the version of me that came out of this. And I'm not sure I want to go back to being the woman he used to love. When Nathan returned, it was a Tuesday. She heard his key in the lock before she had time to prepare herself. He walked in like a man entering a stranger's home. Quiet, cautious. He had cut his hair. Worn a dark jacket she hadn't seen before. He looked older. Stronger. As if heartbreak had reshaped him too. They didn't hug. Didn't say hello. Just looked at each other for a long, heavy moment. I'll just grab my stuff and head out, he said. She nodded. Okay. He moved through the apartment methodically. 2 suitcases. A few framed photos from the shelf. His favorite books. Some clothes from the closet. When he walked into the studio, he paused. Looked around at the paintings. Stopped in front of one. The one she'd made the night he left. Did you make this after? She nodded. He stared at it. A swirling chaos of slate and copper. A figure barely visible beneath layers of angry texture. I can see you in it, he said. I didn't know I was in it until it was finished. Nathan nodded, then turned to leave the room. But before he crossed the threshold, he stopped. I don't hate you, he said. Emily's eyes filled instantly. I hate what you did. I hate that you couldn't come to me when you were hurting. But I don't hate you. She didn't answer. Didn't move. He left 5 minutes later. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't look back. But the door clicked gently behind him, like it was trying not to wake something. The week of the show, Emily went public. The gallery launched the exhibit on social media. A sharp black and white portrait of her went out with the title, The Break in the Pattern, New Works by Emily Arden. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. People noticed the shift in tone. The rumors. The new raw edge in her interviews. One art blog speculated that Emily had suffered a breakdown or divorce. Another praised her emotional courage, and said her new work had shattered her previous ceiling. At the opening night she wore all black. Red lips. Eyes rimmed with defiance. David didn't show. Nathan didn't either. But Claire stood beside her the whole night, clutching her hand as collectors walked by with thoughtful expressions. Critics murmured into voice recorders, and someone behind her whispered, She looks like someone who's been through war. Maybe she had. Near the end of the evening, a stranger approached her. Woman. Mid-40s. Elegant. Lone. I just wanted to say, the woman said softly. Your work, it looks like grief. But it also looks like survival. Emily blinked back sudden emotion. That's what it felt like. The woman smiled. Then you did something right. And just like that, for the first time in months, Emily felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Not happiness. Not closure. But something close to peace. Something like forgiveness, of herself if nothing else. Chapter 8. The Art of Being Seen. The exhibit was a success. In the weeks that followed the opening, the gallery sold 5 of Emily's new paintings. 2 of them went to prominent collectors. A magazine reached out for an interview. A podcast host called her the bleeding heart of the postmodern movement. Critics used words like visceral and raw honesty to describe her art, and for the first time in years, she wasn't being praised for technique or color or structure, but for truth. But truth came at a price. Emily knew it. So did Nathan. A month after he left, Nathan sent another email. Short, polite, subject, divorce. I've been thinking a lot. I don't want to make decisions out of anger. But I also don't want to stay in a place where trust has been broken so deeply. I've spoken to someone. There's no rush. Just wanted you to know where I stand. There was no blame in his words. But they landed like shrapnel anyway. Emily sat at her kitchen table for an hour after reading it, staring out the window at a couple arguing over a parking spot. Life went on. Always did. She finally replied. Understand. Thank you for the grace. When you're ready, we'll talk. She didn't cry. Not then. But later, while brushing her teeth, she looked in the mirror and thought, this is the face of a woman who changed her own story by breaking it. And for the first time, she didn't hate that reflection. That weekend, she went to Claire's apartment for wine and takeout. They sat on the floor with their backs against the couch, like they had when they were 22 and completely broke. Claire took a long sip of Malbec and said, I still think about the version of your life where this never happened. Emily raised an eyebrow. I mean, if the affair hadn't happened. If you and Nathan had just coasted. Emily considered that. That version of my life feels like a painting I abandoned. Maybe it would have turned out beautiful. But it wouldn't have been real. Claire nodded slowly. Oh. What now? I try to live differently. Not perfectly. But honestly. Even when it's ugly. Claire smiled and leaned her head on Emily's shoulder. I'm proud of you. Not for what you did. But for surviving it. 2 weeks later, an unexpected name popped up on Emily's phone. David. Not a text. Oh. She stared at the screen for 3 full rings before answering. Hi. There was a pause, like he was still figuring out what to say. I saw the interview. You look, I don't know, different. Like someone who's finally stopped running. I have, she said softly. I'm not calling to reopen anything, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know. I don't regret it. Not the connection. Not the time. I think you taught me something about myself. Emily swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Same. There was a quiet hum between them. That kind of familiar silence that once meant intimacy and now just meant distance that had finally settled. Well, David said. Take care, Emily. You too. He hung up. And just like that, the story of them ended. Not with screaming. Not with begging. Just a click. A goodbye that had already happened long ago, made official by the absence of pain. Emily's mornings grew slower. She began going on walks again. Through Central Park, through side streets she used to take before life got too loud. She bought herself flowers once a week. She repainted the studio walls. She let the sunlight back in. But she didn't pretend it hadn't happened. She didn't erase Nathan from the photos or delete David's messages. She didn't rewrite herself into a victim or a villain. She just let the truth exist. In her art. In her body. In her friendships. And it changed her. Not into someone better. Just someone realer. Then one morning she received a text. From Nathan. I saw your painting in that window on Spring Street. The one with the gold under the gray. It reminded me of something you said years ago. That we're all just layers. That the trick is not being afraid of the dark ones. Emily stared at the message. Then replied. You always listened better than I gave you credit for. Maybe we both did. She didn't read into it. Didn't take it as a sign. But she smiled. And that felt like enough. Chapter 9. The Life After the Fire. Spring came late that year. It arrived quietly without fanfare. Just a softening of the air, a subtle shift in how the light moved through Emily's windows in the morning. She noticed it one Tuesday, standing barefoot in her kitchen with her coffee cooling beside her. She hadn't cried in weeks. Not because she was done grieving, but because she'd started understanding that grief wasn't a thing to finish. It was a shadow, a rhythm, something that moved with her now. It didn't break her anymore. It just sat quietly in her ribs, reminding her of the cost of transformation. Her show had officially closed. The gallery was already prepping for the next exhibit, but her work had left a mark. Critics still buzzed about it, collectors continued to reach out. Someone from a museum in Boston wanted to commission a piece. And for the first time in a long time, Emily wasn't haunted by the fear that she had nothing left to say. Her art wasn't just expression now, it was evidence of having lived, of having lost, of having bled and built again. One afternoon, Claire brought over a small gift. Just a plain, hard-cover journal with no note, no explanation. Inside the front cover, she had written, "For the thoughts you don't put on canvas." Emily opened to the first blank page that night and wrote, "I am not trying to return to who I was. She's gone. I'm learning to want the woman who's here now instead." It wasn't poetic. It wasn't clever. But it was honest. And that was the entire point. Nathan texted sporadically. Never about the past. Never about emotions. Just logistics, loose threads, things to wrap up. They still hadn't sat down for an in-person conversation about the divorce, but both of them seemed to understand that whatever version of marriage they had shared was over. What remained between them now wasn't romance. It wasn't even love exactly. It was recognition, that they had built something once, and now they were each standing in the ruins of it, choosing which bricks to carry forward. Emily stopped hoping he'd forgive her. Stopped imagining a dramatic reconciliation or a cinematic ending where they ran back to each other. Instead, she thought, "I hope he builds something beautiful next." And for once, that thought didn't hurt. Few months passed. The silence became normal. The mess stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like proof. Of choice, of change, of motion. Emily began volunteering once a week at a non-profit gallery that gave local high school students access to free art classes. She taught them how to stretch canvas, how to layer texture, how to express what didn't have words. They didn't know her story. To them, she was just Ms. Arden. The artist with the weird shoes and the quiet laugh. Felt like enough. One evening, as she was packing up her things after class, one of the students, a girl named Lila with a shaved head and a mouth full of questions, looked up from her work and said, "How do you know when it's finished?" Emily blinked. "The painting." "No. The stuff you went through. The heartbreak or whatever." Emily considered the question. "You don't," she said. "You just get quieter inside. The sharp edges dull. The weight changes. One day you realize it's still there, but it doesn't own you anymore." Lila nodded like that made more sense than anything she'd heard in school. "Cool," she said. "That's kinda badass." Emily smiled. "I guess it is." That night she walked home through the park. The city hummed around her. Sirens in the distance, wind pushing late spring air through the trees. She passed couples holding hands, runners with earbuds, a man throwing a tennis ball for a dog with floppy ears. She didn't feel out of place. She didn't feel like a woman marked by scandal. She felt like a woman becoming. Not healing in order to return. Healing in order to evolve. When she got home, she poured a glass of wine and opened the journal again. This time she wrote, "You are not a tragedy. You are a story still being told." And this time she believed it. Chapter 10. The shape of what's left. Summer arrived with weightless heat and long, breathy evenings. The kind where the city feels suspended. Humid, glowing, alive in its own tired way. It had been nearly 6 months since Nathan left the apartment. 5 since the exhibit. 3 since David's last call. Time, as Emily had learned, didn't fix anything. Just made the sharpness fade. And sometimes that was all you could ask for. She signed the divorce papers on a Monday. No drama. Just a packet in the mail, a notary at the cafe down the street, and her signature next to a man's name she no longer belonged to. She stared at the line where Nathan's name was already written. His signature was neat, measured. A man who'd made peace with it. A man who loved her enough to let her go before she could disappear entirely. She mailed the papers back the same day, then went home and cried in the shower. Not because she regretted it, but because it had meant something. Because grief doesn't vanish when something ends right. It just hums at a different frequency. Later that week, she received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Just her name in handwriting she instantly recognized. Nathan. Inside was a photograph. One she hadn't seen in years. From their second anniversary. Her curled up in his lap on a bench in Montauk, both of them sunburned and smiling like idiots. On the back he'd written, "Not everything we lose was a mistake. Some things are just meant to end when they do." She ran her thumb along the words until they blurred. Then tucked the photo into the back of her journal and didn't cry this time. She just sat with it. And it was enough. The weeks that followed moved gently. She painted, but differently now. Less storm. More space. The canvases were still textured, still layered with story, but they weren't screaming anymore. They were quiet, patient. One painting was a vast field of white, broken only by a single deep gold brushstroke through the center. Her gallerist asked what it meant. Emily said, "That's what it feels like to survive without needing to explain yourself." Sold in 3 days. Claire started dating someone. Emily teased her like old times, but the truth was, she was grateful. For stability. For friendship. For someone who had walked through the worst parts of her and never let go. One night over wine Claire said, "You know you're not who you were, right?" Emily laughed softly. "I think I lost her." "No," Claire replied. "You shed her." Then with a smile, "You're better now. Not because of what happened, but because you stayed. You didn't run. You lived through it." Emily didn't argue. 'Cause for once she agreed. One morning while walking past the river, Emily paused on a bench. No headphones. No phone. Just air and water and people moving past her. She'd spent so much time needing to be seen. By David, by Nathan, by critics and friends and even herself. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. Or ashamed. Or broken. She just felt here. Like someone who had chosen herself, even when it hurt. Like someone who had learned to stand inside the wreckage and call it home until she was ready to build something else. Maybe she wouldn't love like that again. Maybe she would. But the point wasn't the next love. It was the next version of her. That night she painted again. No intention. No commission. Just a canvas and her breath. When she was finished, she stepped back and looked at it. Just light spilling across a dark background like something breaking open. She didn't try to name it. Didn't try to explain it. She just let it be. Because some things aren't meant to be forgiven. Or justified. Some things are meant to be transformed. Emily Arden woke the next morning with sunlight on her face and no fear in her chest. Not because she'd made the right choices, but because she'd owned them. And somewhere in the middle of all that ruin, she had finally become the artist of her own damn life.